Good evening, music world. John here from What's Spinning. I'm a sleepy boy. It's been a long week. It's been a long year of reviewing music, but it's been a super rewarding year. This year has been fantastic. You know, I've been saying throughout my list week so far, it was really hard for me to narrow down my lists this year because there's just been so much truly great material. But you know, we have made it. We got through my top 10 worst albums of the year. We got through my top 5 EPs. And we got through my top 50 singles. If you haven't, go back and check those out. You're not going to want to miss it. But now it's time to talk about my top 20 albums of the year. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some honorable mentions because we're going to be here for a little while. First up in my honorable mentions, want to give a shout out to the new Tennis album, Pollen. I have not chatted about a Tennis album in freaking years just because I thought their style was just getting so dated so incredibly quickly. But, you know, this new album, Pollen, they shine up the production in a big way. They bring in some great elements of bedroom pop and just old school 70s soft rock. And the result is just a really intimate, sweet collection of indie pop tunes about love and life. And it's just really heartwarming. Also, want to give a shout out to this new Tim Hecker album, No Highs. I mean, Tim's music over the last few years, I don't want to say that like I've hated it, but he's definitely been in a much more experimental mode, which is totally fine. It happens in every artist's discography. But, you know, I personally was really happy to hear Tim go back in a much more icy, synth-driven ambient direction. This album is the most interesting in that vein that he's done since Virgins. I would almost say that I like portions of this album more than Virgins. Also want to give a shout out to Wild Nothing's Hold. I mean, I was an old school fan of Jack Tatum's music, but much like a lot of his older fans, I kind of felt like over the years Jack started focusing much more on the aesthetic more than the content itself when it goes to the album. However, this latest one, this might be an album that you might want to come back to, especially if you haven't listened to Wild Nothing in a while. It is just Jack's most personal and most intimate set of tunes ever. The production's great, the singles are awesome, and yeah, some of the interludes really just seem out of place these days, but this is just some really great dream pop. Also, want to shout out the new Killer Mike album, Michael, and I understand, you know, why a lot of people were disappointed with this, because this is not as telling as rap music or as bombastic and fired up as anything that Run the Jewels has put out, but what this is an intimate look at Killer Mike, and if that's something that interests you, definitely check this out. It's just a very gritty southern rap album with a ton of really introspective lyrics, frank discussions, biographical stories. It's an album for Killer Mike, and if you could appreciate that, definitely check this out. Also, final honorable mention is the new Proto-Martyr album, Formal Growth in the Desert. I mean, this is their gnarliest and darkest and grittiest stuff in some time, and that's something that I've been really wanting for them to come back to. And yes, my thoughts on this album maybe fell a little bit, but still, this is easily their most just intense work in a while, and I love the sort of Southern Gothic twist on some of the tracks that we get. So now we're through my honorable mentions. We could chat about my top 20 favorite albums of the year. As always, one album per artist. Yeah, I know it goes without saying, but, you know, we still have to state that. Also, don't forget, friends, this is all opinion. And as always, put your favorite albums of the year down below, because I want to know what I missed. At number 20, it would be the new Hotline T.N.T. album, Cartwheel. The hype on this thing is absolutely real. I feel like every single year there's just that one sort of indie-tinged record that just makes my year, fills my quota. That's what this is, because Hotline T.N.T. here play old school indie, shoegaze, and power pop and slacker rock, all set to tunes of heartbreak, but do it in such a great way that's just so raw and emotional. It reminds me of what these genres were built on and gives me hope for the future. At number 19, I want to give a shout out to the new Hannah Diamond album, Perfect picture, this is what I wanted. This is what puts a smile on my face. I've been a fan of Hannah's for years, but, you know, the more I listened to her debut album, Reflections, I was seriously let down by it. But this is so much more like it. This is one of the most instantaneous pop records I've heard of the year. The production is super sleek and futuristic, as you would expect, but at the same time, Hannah's incredibly charming lyrics and really sweet vocals just melt my heart and put a smile on my face. Also, the hooks on this thing are absolutely fantastic. One of the best pop records of the year. At number 18, Genesis Owusu with Struggler. Leading up to this album, I already respected him as one of the more interesting names in alternative R&B and neo-soul right now. But hearing the singles leading up to this thing and hearing this thing in its entirety made me realize he has grown so much in a few years. This thing is an absolutely freakish synth-pop, alternative pop album with nods to post-punk, neo-soul, and more, all thrown together with easily some of the catchiest hooks I've heard all year and a really eclectic personality. It's a knockout. At number 17, giving it to George Clanton with UTOPIA. Honestly, with this album, George picks up exactly where he left off on his Slide album. It's a very hazy, nostalgic, colorful blast of old school 90s driven electronic music with big hooks. And yeah, it's really catchy, really instantaneous, really interesting stuff, but I think what makes this an interesting listen at the end of the day is that George has a lot of tricks up his sleeve this time around, shockingly so, and most of them really do knock it out of the park. He is an artist that is still trying new things, and I can't wait to hear what he does next. Now at number 16, it's Miss Uchis with Red Moon and Venus. First of all, this year has been an absolute killer one for R&B, more to come. And you know, since Isolation, I've kind of fallen off with Kali's music. She already has a new album coming out in a few months. I have no idea what that's going to sound like. But with this album here, she really did settle my, you know, all my worries about her music. Because this is easily one of the dreamiest, sweetest, sexiest expressions of love and lust that I've heard all year. It's smoky, it's confident, it shows Kali trying new things, and her vocals are to die for. At number 15, it's Danny Brown and JPEGMAFIA with Scaring the Hose. These guys came together on this album and absolutely put together a tour de force of weirdo left field rap. I mean, these two are kingpins in their genres right now, but I do believe we have reached the best timeline with this album. It's glitchy beats, weirdo performances, and A+ pop culture references, but on top of that, Danny and JPEG really do bring out the best in one another. It gets Danny back in that experimental mindset, but it also does a really, really great job of bringing Peggy to that next level of aggression as well. It's a wild ride, and it's magic, just as long as you define magic as overly caffeinated, weirdo, glitchy, noisy hip-hop. At number 14, it's Caroline Polachek, Desire I Want to Turn Into You. Ever since breaking off on her own, between her features and her own solo stuff, I've been nothing short of impressed with Caroline's work, especially with her ability to create her own world. And this album is the next level of that. This is easily her most colorful, immersive album to date. This is her, like, really aiming for the stars and pretty much getting there. Almost every one of her experiments on this album really do pay off. The production's bombastic, her performances are great, and I do really feel like listening to this album that I'm like a part of her world. And I don't know, it just makes me happy. At number 13, it's Slowdive with Everything Is Alive. I had a feeling that I was going to really enjoy this record leading up to it, but I don't think I really knew how much I was going to appreciate it, because this thing is easily the best thing in dream pop this year, as well as some of just the best shoegaze I've heard in the last decade. It's also just a really important album for Slowdive, because they've been doing this since the late 80s, which is crazy to think about, but like, they still are bumping out these experimental cuts. They're trying new things here. It's dreamy. It's infinitely layered. The production is beautiful, and it's just so easy to turn on and escape into. A+. At number 12, I'm going to give it to Julie Byrne, The Greater Wings. Let me just check my notes here. Yes, I have wrote down, it's gorgeous. Yeah? At number 11, this may come as a surprise, and you know what? When I was doing my re-listens, it almost came as a surprise to me as well, just because I do really like this album. Yeah, I'm giving it to Travis Scott with Utopia. For my money, this is what I like to hear in modern rap. No buts about it. This is what I like to hear. This is a long album, and you may argue that it's bloated. I would definitely understand that at points, but when this album is on, this is one of the most exciting things out there right now. The beats, the way that they progress, Travis's ideas, the production, the really solid feature list outside, oh God, of the Fiend track. We're not talking about it. But overall, I was just so impressed with this. For modern rap, this is what I need to hear. And yes, it's one of the weirder projects in hip-hop you'll hear this year. And yes, it's over an hour, but I think the rewards are here. Which leads me to my top 10 albums of the year. And at number 10, we're kicking it off with King Krule himself, Archie Marshall, with Space Heavy. I mean, I've been a fan of Archie's stuff for years now, and I've always enjoyed, his stuff from here to here, but I feel like sometimes, he focuses so hard on the aesthetic that he just kind of misses the point. But that's not the case with this new album, Space Heavy, because this is the most seriously, A, surreal, and B, just downtrodden and gloomy stuff that Archie's ever put out. And them's fighting words, I know. But compared to albums like The Ooze, this track list is so concise. It's all killer, no filler. It's a little artsy. It's a little post-punky at points. It's very surreal, but it's so captivating. And at number 9, I'm giving it to Sufjan Stevens with Javelin. I mean, I think that we can all collectively just appreciate and agree that when we saw this album coming down the pipe and knew that this was the first true blue folk album from Sufjan since Carrie and Lowell, we were in the mood for a gut punch. Yeah, that's what we get. But as much as I braced myself, it clearly was not enough, because this is an emotional, pummeling. I mean, between Sufjan's whisper quiet vocals, the orchestrations, the gospel choir, and the unbearably visual, personal lyrics. Just buckle up, because the king of indie folk is back. And at number 8, it's James Blake with Playing Robots into Heaven. I got a lot of flack for enjoying this album as much as I do, and I don't get why, because this album is awesome. This is much more than the sort of very summery art pop that James has tried out on his last 2 albums, which wasn't bad, but I personally needed a little bit more. This is James going back to his experimental roots, like the early days, the EP days of James Blake. But it doesn't seem like full of itself. It doesn't seem like fan service either. It seems like James really rediscovering his love for this sound. That makes me happy. It's just so cold and lonely. The samples are just so icy, and James's vocals are great. At number 7, I Don't Care. I Don't Care. It's White Reaper with Asking for a Ride. White Reaper are doing some great things out there, and not enough people are really appreciating it. This is nowhere near the sort of softer side of their You Deserve Love album. This thing is packed with power chords and arena-sized hooks. And yes, the White Reaper formula, it's very cut and dry, and it's very simple, but they do it so well. And if that's not enough for you, I get it, but it's enough for me. It has some of the best rock tracks of the year, whether it be Pink Slip or Bozo or Getting Into Trouble with the Boss or Pages. Just so many unbelievable tracks here. Go listen to it if you just love, hearing it. It kind of sounds like Weezer, if Weezer just listened to a lot of Van Halen growing up. And at number 6, an album that I knew I was going to enjoy, but I certainly didn't expect to be talking about it right here of all places. No siree. That would be the new Alan Palomo album, World of Hassle. This thing has grown on me immensely since I reviewed it, and I already had given it a strong 8. This thing is nothing short of just a really slick, just very old school pop record with a ton of 80s synths, and this thing is freaking sleazy, beyond words sleazy. I mean, the only thing sleazier than the material on this album is Alan's mustache. And listen, this is far from a lyrical masterpiece. We're not gonna call it that. As a matter of fact, it's far from it. But for just a genuinely fun, hilarious pop record with an absolute ton of personality and more catchy hooks than it deserves. Check this thing out. Okay, we have reached my top 5 albums of the year, and at number 5, I'm giving it to the new Osees album, Intercepted Message. And, this goes a lot further than just me being a huge, fan of the band's work over the years. This is a complete reinvention, and, if you know anything about the band, they do that like every 6 months at this point in their career. But this is a really great turn for them, because this is their turn towards synth punk. This thing's got sweaty energy, colorful song palettes, and more synths than you can shake a stick at. But I think what makes this album just pop for me so hard is just how much fun they're having. I mean, this thing just starts up and doesn't stop until it fizzles out. There's some great experimental cuts on here, especially some of the synthier odysseys that we get later on in the album. This thing is a freaking blast from start to finish, and if you haven't listened to an Osees record in a while, give this a shot. Yeah, it's just the weirdo blast of energy that I didn't know that I needed this year. And at number 4, they done did it. It's King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with PetroDragonic Apocalypse. I mean, when it comes to the Giz these days, a band that is 25 albums into their career, which has only lasted like a little over a decade or whatever it's been now. However, they still just find ways to surprise me. You never know what you're going to get from them. It could be a nice, light and fluffy sort of psychedelic record. It could be like a microtonal experimental album. Or you could get this here, which is a super heavy psych opus to just the end of the human race. And it is done so well. Now, this is a long album, but across these, tracks, which usually are, pretty beefy in length, it is nothing short but throttling, exciting, wild. It's a brutal psych metal journey that just has tons of personality and just so many great moments. And yeah, it's a little long-winded, I totally get that, but this thing is heavier than most metal that I've heard this year. It's just so good. Give it a listen, because I guess it is my rock album of the year. And at number 3, hip-hop project of the year, and it makes me so damn happy. It's Billy Woods and Kenny Segal with Maps. Leading up to this thing, I was hyped. Billy has been on another level recently. Also, Kenny has been, one of the more interesting producers in the underground these days. And leading up to this thing, I thought this thing just could knock it out of the park, and it does, because this is a concept album about life on the road. Its highest highs, its lowest lows, and it is just so visual and exhausting, and just it gives you an eagle-eyed view of something that we don't think about a lot. Kenny's production is just flawless. I mean, it's just so dusty and rainy day and really, really impressive. And the features are great. I mean, Billy for years has been one of the underground's most interesting names, but with this album here, he's just pulled himself out of the pack completely. And at number 2, Young Fathers for years have been a band that I've looked at and I'm just like, wow, you can make a really classic album with this sound. But every time I was just let down just a little bit. But with this new album, Heavy at number 2, this is a happening of neo soul and art pop and experimental pop and so much more. They have built their sound over the years to a new level, and we get that here. It is an absolutely mesmerizing, kaleidoscopic experience that you are not going to want to miss. It's well produced, it's poignant, it's well performed. What more can I say? Which leads me to my number 1 album of the year. And, much like, the last few albums of the year for me, whether it be the Beach House Record 7, whether it be the Panopticon album, whether it be Fleet Fox's Shore, whether it be that last FKA Twigs album, or if it was that Spiritualized album, at the end of the day, this is just an album that just makes me just feel a certain way. It's an album that I can escape into. And this album is one of the albums, like one of the closest I've ever gotten to giving a 10 to a record. And that would be, I said earlier this has been a killer year for R&B. But it didn't get any better for me than my number 1 record of the year. That would be Kelela's Raven. I mean, for years, Kelela's been a go-to for me as far as modern R&B goes. Her ideas are always outside the box. You know, the production is always a little bit ahead of the game. She has ideas and can perform them in a way, you know, that's not like her contemporaries. But this album, it's damn near perfect. It's damn near a 10. This is one of the most lush, cinematic, immersive R&B records I've heard in the last decade. It is full of poignant lyrics about love, lust, sexuality, gender, passion, self-identity, and more. And yes, it's a little bit long, but Kelela's ideas, the production here, the beats when they're there, her vocals, they just all make this completely immersive experience that even though this album's fairly long, I get lost in it every time. And as soon as it's done, I always want to listen to it very quickly again. It is, simply put, an experience and my album of the year. So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. This has been my top 20 albums of the year. Go back and make sure you've seen all my other list week's videos, and my reviews will start again in a few weeks. I am also planning a little something different. Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing going on blog-wise until early January. So between now and then, I'm going to be reviewing 5, older albums that I would say, to me at least, are major reasons that I started this channel. So I'm going to be reviewing some stuff from Nine Inch Nails, The Smiths, David Bowie, Aesop Rock, as well as Radiohead in the next couple of weeks as sort of classic reviews, but I want to put my own spin on it. There are reasons that I started this blog and reasons that I am the music head that I am. So with that being said, happy holidays, everybody. Healthy New Year, and I'll see you all soon. Have a great day, friends.